A young woman was just having her picture taken with Niagara Falls in the background, and then she slipped.
What drives someone to face one of nature's deadliest wonders?
Oh my God! Oh!
From a man who launched off Niagara Falls on a jet ski to raise awareness, only to fall to his death when his parachute failed, to a woman swallowed by the Whirlpool Rapids, revived only by sheer miracle.
I don't even remember falling, actually sliding into the water.
Some stories end in death, and some in impossible survival. Get ready to witness the 15 most tragic deaths in the history of Niagara Falls. Robert Overacker, October 1st, 1995. A man on a single jet ski hurtled toward the edge of Horseshoe Falls, thousands of gallons of raging water thundering beneath him. His name was Robert Overacker. He was 39 years old. Overacker wasn't chasing cheap fame. He wasn't pulling a stunt for thrills. His mission had purpose: to raise awareness about the growing crisis of homelessness in America. This was his way of forcing people to look, really look. His plan was wild but calculated. He would launch off the edge of Niagara Falls in front of stunned tourists, cameras rolling. At the critical moment, he'd trigger a rocket-powered parachute strapped to his back and float safely to the water below. As he reached the brink, he let go of the jet ski and fired the parachute. It didn't open. Spectators gasped. Then they screamed. Among them was his own brother, helpless in the crowd. The drop, 167 feet straight down. For a second, people thought he'd made it. A shape bobbed in the water, drifting in the current, but it wasn't life. It was a body. His remains were pulled from the river by Maid of the Mist staff and rushed to Niagara General Hospital. He was pronounced dead. He never came home to his wife. Robert Overacker became the 15th person to intentionally go over Niagara Falls in or on a device since 1901. The parachute that failed him was found afterward, intact, still packed, unused. A silent ending to a message meant to be loud. Lindsay Burgess. The Whirlpool Rapids at Niagara are pure violence, a stretch of water so aggressive, so relentlessly brutal that rescue crews say nothing survives its pull. It was here that 29-year-old Lindsay Burgess vanished. She had been hiking with her fiancé in Devil's Hole, just upstream from the Maelstrom, where the cliffs are steep and the current roars like an engine. Curious, she stepped close to the edge, wanting to feel the water. Just a fingertip. The rocks beneath her shifted. In a blink, she slipped and disappeared. The river swallowed her like a fist. It felt like a tornado underwater, she later said. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't breathe. It was like the river didn't want to let me go. On shore, her fiancé watched helplessly, screaming her name into the chaos. Time slowed. It felt endless. Almost a full minute later, her body surfaced, battered, limp, drifting fast in the current. By sheer luck, a passing tour boat spotted her. Crew members hauled her aboard and started CPR immediately, right there on the deck as the river raged around them. She was unconscious, her face blue. By the time she reached the hospital, she was on a respirator. No one knew if she'd survive, but she did. Somehow, Lindsay Burgess lived, torn from the grip of water that almost never lets go. She became one of the only known people to fall into the Whirlpool Rapids and make it out alive. Ayano Tokumasu. On August 14, 2011, Ayano Tokumasu, a 20-year-old Japanese student living in Toronto, was visiting Niagara Falls with a tour group. It was a clear, busy day near the edge of Horseshoe Falls, where tourists packed the railings and cameras flashed non-stop. Ayano stood near the barrier, trying to snap a photo of the famous view. She leaned forward slightly, reaching out for a better angle. In that brief moment, she lost her footing and slipped. Hundreds of people were nearby, but no one could react in time. She fell, and the water took her instantly. There was no time to scream or a chance to grab her, the endless roar of the falls swallowing her whole. For 4 days, there was no sign of her. Search teams scoured the area, but the river gave up nothing. Then, at around 10 a.m. on Thursday, an employee at the Cave of the Winds attraction on the U.S. side noticed something floating near the rocks. Park police and firefighters were called in. They pulled a body from the lower Niagara River, roughly 100 feet downstream from where she had disappeared. It was Ayano. There had been no stunt, just a simple, quiet moment that turned deadly. Police notified her family. Though her name wasn't included in the first reports, everyone present already knew. She had simply been trying to capture a memory. Instead, she became one, part of the river's story, another life claimed by the edge of wonder and danger. Kirk Raymond Jones. An 8-foot inflatable ball was seen spinning through the rapids of the Niagara River, its hatch unzipped and flapping open, just moments before it plunged over Horseshoe Falls. Kirk Jones, 53 years old, was supposed to be inside. He had done this once before. In 2003, Jones made headlines by becoming the first known person to survive a plunge over Niagara Falls without any protective gear. It was a deliberate jump, and somehow he lived. The stunt brought him a flash of attention, news interviews, short-lived fame, even a brief gig with a traveling circus. But eventually, the spotlight faded, and so did the momentum. In April 2017, he returned with a new plan: to ride over the falls sealed inside a giant inflatable ball. This time, he brought company. A website, later taken down, showed Jones posing with a 7-foot-long boa constrictor named Misty, advertising the upcoming stunt with merchandise and the tagline, "Believe in the impossible." On April 19th, tourists watched the ball twist and spin in the violent river current. Its hatch was visibly open. No one could tell for sure who or what was still inside by the time it went over. Weeks later, his body was recovered downstream in the lower Niagara River. The boa constrictor was never found. Only an empty cage remained inside the van he left parked near the falls, along with the lingering question, what really happened in those final moments before the plunge? Robert Ahrens. On a Thursday afternoon in 1990, a man entered the Niagara River near Prospect Point. His name was Robert Ahrens, 56 years old, from Tonawanda, New York. Witnesses say he appeared calm as he stepped into the water. Just before reaching the brink of the American Falls, he turned and waved to the crowd. Then, without hesitation, he went over the edge. It was broad daylight. There were tourists nearby, and it was all caught on film. A television crew happened to be at Niagara Falls on a separate assignment. Their camera was rolling as Ahrens entered the river, and they recorded the entire event, the slow drift in the current, the moment he turned and waved, and his final fall over the 70-foot drop. The footage aired on the local evening news, but due to its disturbing nature, the station chose not to broadcast it again. Earlier that same day, Ahrens had been reported missing. His car was discovered parked near the falls, leading authorities to believe the act had been intentional. Police tentatively confirmed his identity based on the video footage. By the following morning, search efforts began in the lower Niagara River, where the water is violent and chaotic. Recovery operations in that area are notoriously difficult. Bodies that go over the American Falls are often lost, swept beneath the rapids, pinned by rocks, or trapped below the surface for days, sometimes forever. For Robert Ahrens, the falls offered no return. His body was never found. Maude Willard. At 4:05 p.m. on September 7, 1901, Maude Willard climbed into a sealed oak barrel at the edge of the Niagara River. She was 25 years old, a variety performer from Canton, Ohio, and the only woman that day willing to risk the ride. The plan was bold. She would shoot through the Whirlpool Rapids inside the same barrel Carlisle Graham had successfully used 5 times before. Graham would swim the lower rapids to Lewiston. Maude would take the more dangerous route, strapped inside the cask, with just a narrow air hole, and her small fox terrier curled beside her for company. The barrel entered the river and moved swiftly through the first breakers, bobbing and tilting in the fast current. Then it reached the whirlpool. For 6 hours, it spun in endless, violent circles, slammed by waves and driftwood, pulled by currents that even the strongest swimmers couldn't fight. Onlookers gathered along the shore, watching helplessly. Some waited. Others gave up and left as the sun went down. At 10 p.m., the barrel finally drifted close enough for rescuers to retrieve it. When they pried it open, they found Maude Willard dead. She had suffocated inside. The dog survived, saved by instinct, its nose pressed to the small opening that allowed just enough air to trickle in. It was a tragic end to a daring attempt. She had braved what few would ever consider, only to lose her life in the quiet darkness of a wooden barrel spinning endlessly in the river. Ed Delahanty. On July 2nd, 1903, one of America's biggest baseball stars vanished near Niagara Falls. Ed Delahanty, 35 years old, had been drinking heavily. That night, he boarded a train heading east. visibly intoxicated and increasingly agitated. According to reports, he caused a disturbance on board and even threatened other passengers with a straight razor. The conductor had him removed from the train near the International Bridge, a few miles upstream from the falls. It was late, he was alone, and after stepping off into the night, he disappeared. Several days later, his body was found at the base of Horseshoe Falls. His leg was severed, his clothes torn. There were no witnesses. No one saw him fall. Delahanty wasn't just another ball player, he was a legend, a 5-time National League batting champion, one of the most feared hitters of the dead ball era, and a future Hall of Famer. But by the summer of 1903, things were falling apart. His brother later told reporters that Ed was broke, emotionally unstable, and spiraling in the final weeks of his life. What happened that night remains an unsolved mystery. Did he try to walk across the bridge and lose his footing? Did he intentionally jump? Or was there someone else involved who pushed him? The only things left behind were a scattering of confused reports, public speculation, and a body caught by the river. Ed Delahanty became one of the first American celebrities to die at Niagara Falls. Just a man who vanished into the dark. Charles Stevens. They called him the Demon Barber of Bristol. Charles Stevens was 58 years old, a father of 11, and already well known in England for his daring parachute jumps and high dives. But in 1920, he set his sights on something bigger, Niagara Falls. He wasn't after money or fleeting fame. He wanted a place in the history books, to be remembered forever as the next great daredevil to conquer the Horseshoe Falls. On July 11th, Stevens climbed into a barrel made of Russian oak. It was his first attempt at going over the falls. Other experienced stuntmen, including Bobby Leach, who had survived the plunge years earlier, warned him the barrel's design was flawed. They urged him to test it empty first. Stevens refused, convinced they were trying to discourage or sabotage him. To help steer the barrel, he tied a heavy anvil to his feet. A small oxygen tank was added at the last minute. He wore no helmet, just light padding. At 8:15 a.m., he launched from Snyder's Point, about 3 miles upstream. By 8:55, the barrel went over the edge and disappeared. Seconds later, it smashed against the rocks at the base of the falls. The force of impact was catastrophic. The anvil burst through the barrel's bottom, dragging Stevens down with it. When the wreckage was found, only his right arm remained, still strapped in place, still bearing his tattoo. The rest of his body was never recovered. Charles Stevens vanished into the water chasing legacy and never came back.
Let's dive in. It's finally time for the open discussion.
This is the most tragic death at Niagara Falls in all of history, and once you see her face, you'll never forget it. 1 second she was standing, the next she was airborne. Was this an accident or something far more sinister? Who was she running from, or what was she running toward? Everything about this image screams unanswered questions and raw panic. Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to mention #OpenDiscussion. Vincent C. Stack. For more than 30 years, the name was unknown. Just a set of badly decomposed human remains discovered on the rocky shoreline of Lake Ontario in 1992. There was a missing ID, and he has no one to claim them. The mystery endured for decades. Then, in April 2024, investigators confirmed the identity. Vincent C. Stack, a 40-year-old man from Buffalo, New York. Stack had disappeared near Niagara Falls State Park in December 1990. Authorities at the time believed he may have gone over the falls, though no witnesses came forward and no body was recovered. What they now believe happened is this. His body traveled 15 miles through the Niagara River to the river's mouth, then drifted more than 130 miles across the open waters of Lake Ontario before eventually washing ashore near what is now the Novellis plant. When the remains were first found, they were severely decomposed, mostly skeletal, unrecognizable, and missing any personal effects. The medical examiner could only offer a wide time of death estimate, anywhere between 6 months and 5 years prior. With so little to go on, the case went cold. In 2022, the investigation was reopened. A fresh DNA sample was extracted and submitted for comparison. In February 2024, it finally matched, connecting the remains to Stack's surviving family. There is still no confirmed cause of death, no certainty about how or why he went into the water. Only a name to close the file, and a long-lost man returned after 34 years adrift. His family, at last, has an answer. Jesse Sharp. The kayak was just 12 feet long. On June 5, 1990, 28-year-old Jesse Sharp launched it into the Niagara River, steering toward the edge of Horseshoe Falls. He wasn't a reckless thrill seeker or wide-eyed tourist. Jesse was a skilled and experienced whitewater kayaker from Tennessee who had been planning this descent for years. Friends came with a video camera to record the moment. He told them this would be the stunt to launch his career. Jesse was so confident in the outcome that he made dinner reservations in Lewiston, 4 miles downstream. He even parked his car at the restaurant where he expected to end the day, dry, triumphant, and full of stories to tell. But the river had other plans. Power station operators upstream saw him heading for the falls and quickly cut water flow, hoping to strand him on the rocks before he reached the brink. Jesse maneuvered around the hazards and kept paddling. At 1:45 p.m., he approached the edge and lifted his paddle above his head, a final pose for the camera, before vanishing over the falls. He wanted his face visible in the footage and believed he could escape any danger if things went wrong, but Jesse never resurfaced. His kayak was recovered, destroyed by the impact. His body was never found. The reservation in Lewiston remained unclaimed. The table stayed empty. Jesse Sharp had believed in complete control until he met the water that never gives it back. George Stathakis. Crowds lined the riverbank on July 5, 1930, waiting to witness a man and his barrel challenge the power of Niagara's Horseshoe Falls. The man was George Stathakis, a 46-year-old Greek immigrant and chef from Buffalo, New York. He believed this stunt would bring him fame, fortune, and a future as a published author. The barrel he designed was massive, constructed of wood and steel, weighing nearly a ton. He believed it was strong enough to withstand the fall. Confident in his plan, he brought only a single oxygen tank, ignoring the advice of friends and experts who urged him to take more. Stathakis had told them, "If I do not come out in 3 hours, then there is no reason to continue living." Before sealing himself inside, he gently placed his companion beside him, a turtle named Sunny, said to be 150 years old. That afternoon, the barrel was secured and pushed into the Niagara River. The plunge didn't kill him. The barrel survived the fall, but it became trapped behind the waterfall, wedged in the rocks behind the roaring curtain of water. Rescue crews tried desperately to reach him but couldn't break through in time. Hours passed. Air ran out. After 8 hours sealed inside, George Stathakis was dead. Sunny, miraculously, was still alive. When the barrel was finally retrieved and opened, the scene inside was grim. Water had seeped through loose screws. The inner walls were scratched, etched with the marks of a man who had fought to live but ran out of time. Stephen Peer. He grew up in Niagara Falls, watching daring men defy gravity on tightropes stretched high across the gorge. As a boy, Stephen Peer had seen the awe they inspired, the crowds, the fame, the near-mythic status of those who walked the line. By 1887, at 46 years old, he was no longer content to be a spectator. He was ready to make his mark. On June 22nd, before a crowd of spectators, Peer stepped onto a cable just 5/8 of an inch thick, narrower than any tightrope used in previous crossings. He moved slowly and deliberately, balancing with intense focus as the Niagara River churned far below him. The tension in the crowd was electric. Step by step, he made his way across the gorge. When he reached the other side, cheers erupted. The town celebrated. For the first time, a local man had joined the ranks of the tightrope legends who had come before him. But the triumph was short-lived. 3 nights later, in the early hours of June 25th, Peer was found dead beneath the same rope that had made him a hero. There was not any crowd, only the sound of rushing water and a body broken on the rocks below. It's believed that Peer had been drinking that night and attempted an unscheduled crossing in the dark. He slipped. The same rope that lifted him to glory became the very thing that ended his life. William Red Hill, Jr. By the 1940s, the name Red Hill was already legend in Niagara Falls. His father, William Red Hill Sr., was known across the region as a hero, having rescued dozens from the river and recovered over 100 bodies from its depths. Red Hill Jr. grew up in that legacy, carrying the weight of living up to it. And for a time, he did. Determined to prove himself, Hill Jr. carved his own reputation along the gorge. Twice he swam across the base of the American Falls. Twice he braved the Whirlpool Rapids in a barrel made of steel. One of those attempts drew a crowd of more than 200,000 spectators. Both times he emerged alive, battered but breathing. But survival wasn't what he wanted most. What consumed him was a dream he couldn't finish. building a memorial to honor his father. With no funds and few options, he aimed for the biggest stunt of all, going over Horseshoe Falls. On August 5, 1951, at age 38, Hill launched his homemade device. It wasn't a barrel, but a chaotic invention. 13 inner tubes lashed together, wrapped in fishing net, and painted silver. He called it the Thing. At 3:30 p.m., the Thing went over the brink. Seconds later, it disintegrated. For 2 minutes, the water gave nothing back. Then, scattered pieces of rubber surfaced. His mother's cries echoed across the gorge. The next morning, his body was found near the Maid of the Mist dock. His death ended an era and pushed lawmakers to act. From that point forward, stunting at Niagara became a crime. Robert Billings. Robert Billings was not a daredevil, nor a tourist chasing the spectacle of Niagara. He was a poet. Born in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and raised in nearby Fort Erie, Billings built a life in words. He earned 2 master's degrees in English, one from Queen's University and another from the University of Windsor. His poems, essays, and reviews appeared widely in Canada, Britain, and the United States. Within Canadian literary circles, he was known as a thoughtful critic, a teacher, and an editor of Poetry Canada Review and Poetry Toronto. But behind the public life, Billings carried private struggles. After the collapse of his marriage, depression settled heavily over him. In November of 1986, at just 42 years old, he walked to the brink of Horseshoe Falls and jumped. Search teams scoured the river in the days that followed, yet nature itself closed the case before answers could come. Horseshoe Falls froze over that winter, halting recovery efforts. For months, his fate remained an open wound, spoken of in hushed tones within the community that had admired his work. Only when the ice thawed the following June did the river finally release him. His body was recovered 6 months after his death. Billings' words had explored beauty, doubt, and human fragility. In the end, the place where he was born became the place where his life ended. For those who knew him, the loss was not just another tragedy at Niagara, but the silencing of a voice that had always sought meaning in the chaos of the world. Matthew Webb. Captain Matthew Webb was already a legend before he ever came to Niagara. In 1875, he became the first man to swim the English Channel without artificial aids, battling tides and cold for nearly 22 hours. For more than 3 decades, no one else could match his achievement. His name became synonymous with endurance and courage. But Webb was restless. Fame and fortune had not followed as he hoped, and by 1883 he sought a new test, one that would reclaim public attention. He chose Niagara Falls, not the brink itself, but the Whirlpool Rapids just downstream. The water there surges with terrifying force, stronger than nearly any current on Earth. Locals warned him it could not be done. On July 24th, Webb entered the river near the suspension bridge, cheered on by a crowd that had gathered to witness history. For a few brief moments, he swam powerfully, cutting into the waves as he had across the channel years before. Then the river revealed its strength. The rapids caught him, hurled him against rocks, and dragged him under. He did not resurface. The Illustrated London News later called him the bravest and greatest of swimmers. His body was recovered 4 days later, battered by the water he had sought to master. Webb's channel crossing would remain unmatched until 1911, when Thomas William Burgess finally repeated the feat. Yet Webb's legacy endures differently. His triumph was extraordinary, but it was his fatal recklessness at Niagara that sealed his story forever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future content. I truly appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time.